What's eating you? Psychology Eats is here to help you. What's eating you? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome back to Psychology Eats. So, what's eating you? Well, today I am discussing a case that is in the news. It is the case of Ronnie O'Neal. Here's Ronnie. Ronnie murdered his wife and his brutally murdered his wife and his daughter. And the reason why I'm talking about this case, one, because it's in my feed, it's coming up in my YouTube feed. But I want to talk about Ronnie and what I believe is an obvious mental illness, that he appears to be schizophrenic um, with psychosis. And so, because of that diagnosis and him being unstable, I'm not sure what happened prior to the incident, but I can guesstimate that he was showing bizarre behaviors and talking in a way that didn't make sense. And I'm sure it was probably happening for weeks prior to him acting out and murdering his family and even attempting to murder his son. So I'm going to look a little bit at the case and talk about um, what families can do to prevent something like this from happening in your family. If you have a family member who is maybe schizophrenic with psychosis, possibly having, and they're unstable and they are paranoid in their thinking, illogical, what can families do to prevent this from happening?
This is the first impression jurors received of Ronnie O'Neal, the Riverview man charged in a gruesome rampage that killed his girlfriend, his young daughter, and nearly killed his 8-year-old son. O'Neal, representing himself, shouted at the jury during his opening statement. And the evidence is going to show that law enforcement tampered with evidence. But the state says evidence is indisputable that the only person responsible for the violent attack on his family is Ronnie O'Neal. And it starts with a 911 call from Kenyatta Barrett, O'Neal's girlfriend. She made that call with fear in her voice. Kenyatta can be heard pleading for her life. Prosecutors say by then she'd already been shot. And while the recording continued, they say O'Neal can be heard beating her with a shotgun. The evidence will show that was just the beginning. That's just the beginning of what happened this evening. Investigators say after killing Kenyatta, O'Neal brutally murdered his 9-year-old daughter, Ranivia, and tried to stab to death his 8-year-old son, also named Ronnie, before setting him and the house on fire. And it's just the beginning of what became an odyssey for this little boy. An odyssey of violence, an odyssey of brutality. The little boy, however, survived the attack, barely. But the words that came out of this little boy's mouth were not a cry for help. They were not a help me or a painful cry. They will tell you the first words that came out of this little brave boy's mouth. My dad killed my mommy. The Oneal has indicated that he plans to argue that he acted in self-defense. Meanwhile, his son, Ronnie IV, is expected to testify in this case. Right now, he's 11 years old at this point. This happened 3 years ago, and he is going to testify.
So that is Ronnie testifying on his, he's presenting himself. And that's another part of the judicial system when it comes to people who are mentally ill. Yes, he has rights, and, he's mentally ill, but he is not operating in a stable mind. He is not operating in a stable mind. And in my opinion, he should have been deemed, that he was not capable, mentally capable of representing himself and putting his victims, his son, through a trial where he is not mentally stable, the father. But I guess maybe they did, I'm sure they did a psychiatric evaluation and determined that he was fit to stand trial. Because the state probably doesn't want him to be able to plead insanity and then get a life sentence in like a mental hospital. But what they are most likely trying to do is have him serve his time in a regular max prison, which I get it. But at the same time, this guy is so mentally unstable and so sick. Is it even fair to other inmates to even have him in a regular facility, prison? Because he will most likely, get to a regular prison and act out in a similar way because he is so disturbed. He is so disturbed. So he has convinced himself that his girlfriend was attacking him, which is why he defended himself. And now the state is going through this whole trial with him, and evidence obviously will prove that he is fully responsible for the murder of his girlfriend, of his daughter, and the attempted murder of his son. So let me show you his son's testimony. So the state has called in his son to testify. And so this is what we're going to watch now. Thank goodness his son is in a remote location. But just listen to how Ronnie, the murderer, alleged, addresses his son and how his son addresses him.
Surviving the unthinkable.
I just saw my dad holding a shotgun and my mom that mom was screaming at him.
That little boy testifying at his father's murder trial. He's the son of Ronnie Oneal, his father on trial for the murder of the boy's mother and sister, and also for trying to kill Ronnie, allegedly. Now, because he's representing himself, this creates the unusual scenario of the father cross-examining, questioning his own son. The man is accused of trying to kill him, and now he is basically questioning his son's testimony.
Traumatizing his son over again.
At the courthouse in Hillsborough County. Aaron, even separated by video screen because the boy is in a remote location, this had to take incredible courage by this now 11-year-old boy.
Yeah, Chris, he was incredibly brave. He showed unbelievable composure in that remote location as he gave his testimony this morning, followed and had to describe all of these horrific events that occurred that evening. What you're about to hear is part of little Ronnie's testimony. He's 11 years old now, followed by some of the cross-examination that he experienced with his father, who, as you said, is representing himself. This was the first time they have seen each other and spoken to each other since the attack on March 2018.
State, you ready to proceed?
I just want to pause and say this was unnecessary, in my opinion, to have his son testify. They did not need his son's testimony to be able um, to convict this man. And by having his son be in the presence of his father through video, they re-traumatized that kid. Absolutely re-traumatized him. He probably hasn't seen his father. He hasn't heard his voice. And for him to have to listen to his father in the courtroom and relive what happened, they just didn't need it. In my opinion, they didn't need that testimony in order to do what they're going to need to do with this man.
I just saw my dad holding a shotgun and my mom, that mom screaming at him.
And your father had a shotgun. What happened next? What did he do?
My mom ran in my sister's room. My mom ran in my sister's room and turned into the closet. And then my dad said, come in here and come kill this B-word.
Did you hear any shots from the shotgun before that?
Yes.
How many times?
One.
Was there a time when your mother was able to get out of the closet?
She was stumbling outside, and then I just saw my dad chase her.
What do you remember happening next?
My dad told me to walk around and say, some words.
And do you remember what words your father told you to say?
Allah Akbar.
Allahu Akbar.
Yes.
Did he do something to your sister?
Yes, he hit her with an axe. And then he went on the log that followed him. He put me on the ground, and then he had his foot on top. I was laying in my stomach, he had his foot on top of me, and he was holding me down, and he was lighting a match. Mr. O'Neal, any questions?
How you doing, Ron?
Good.
It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you too.
Did you see me shoot?
I'm going to pause it there. So, sorry. So the father says to the son, it's good to see you, man. And his son says, it's good to see you too. The heartache, the loss, the fear for this kid is undescribable. And yet he still has a sense of respect toward his father. Even though that happened when he was 8 years old, but that is a traumatic experience that is forever burned into his brain. Because when we have traumatic experiences, we don't forget them. So in psychology, we do a lot to help people to repress some of those memories that are so traumatic and so difficult to deal with. And it has to be done in a way that the person, like this little boy, doesn't develop a split personality, right? So imagine the night of that murder for him. For any of us to be able to save ourselves, to save our mind, to save ourselves emotionally, you want to bury what happened. But because the mind is so, I don't know the word, skilled at trying to help save us, it can actually create a personality disorder for this kid. So I'm sure they have him in all, in counseling, to help him process everything. But let's finish his testimony.
Them all.
No.
Did I hurt you that night of this incident?
Yes.
I did. And how did I hurt you?
You stabbed me.
And investigators have said that Ronnie O'Neal tried to.
And he is the little boy. His son is very brave, and however, um, I just think we got to figure out another way that we don't re-traumatize children or victims in general when it comes to testimony and trials. Because this is a good example that this little boy should have never had to be in the presence of a monster. You put him in the presence of a monster and then had him talk to the monster. Unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. So, as the case moves on, Ronnie, the father, continues to plead his case. He is delusional. He is paranoid. And from what I can see, definitely a paranoid schizophrenic with delusions of grandeur, um, probably hallucinating that night, probably hallucinating now. It would be interesting to know if he's on medication. I'm sure he's refusing medication. And so, hopefully, I think coming up in the next couple of days, they're going to have they're going to finally make a decision. The jury will decide his fate. I'm 195% sure he'll be convicted of their murders, and he will be sentenced most likely. I don't know the state this is in, but it could be death, it could be life imprisonment. So, for families who have a loved one or somebody you care about who is experiencing delusions the way I'm sure Ronnie was experiencing and talking out of his head, um, saying things that weren't true, being paranoid and fearful, and actually believing in his state of mind, he probably really believed that his girlfriend was attempting to murder him. Um, and he could have felt the same way or believed the same about his daughter because he was in a state of psychosis. So, and it's very scary. It is absolutely very scary for families to deal with this because people with mental illness, they have rights. And so even though you have a family member that may be delusional and talking out of their head and making threats, you just can't pick up the phone and call the hospital and say, you need to come and pick up my husband, my brother, my cousin. They talking crazy. We don't know what to do and we're in fear. If that you call and let's say the police come out, you take them to the hospital. If they get to the hospital and don't appear to be, they're able to, talk like they, okay, and the hospital doesn't have he doesn't, the person doesn't meet the criteria to be hospitalized, then they won't be, right? And they'll be sent home. And they'll continue to have their delusions and all of that. And so the law is there to protect all of us, you know, because we don't want somebody, let's say I have a dispute with my husband I don't want to, the law protects so that I wouldn't be able to call a hospital and say, come get my husband. He's delusional. There has to be criteria. And so what that criteria says is that the person must be a threat to themselves or others. A threat. And even with that being said, let's say a family member called on Ronnie, and because he was delusional, he was scary, nobody knew what he was going to do, he was threatening, and they got him in the hospital. In most states, they're only going to hold him for 3 days and kind of see where he is. So this guy, I mean, he looks kind of off now, but the day of the murder, he was well groomed, so that's how he presented himself prior to the murder. He could have very well went to the hospital. They could have had him evaluated, and he was able to talk his way out of it. So that's what the scary part is when it comes to the treatment of people with mental illnesses. Sometimes, unfortunately, an eruption has to happen, an incident has to happen before help is given. And that is what is so sad and so scary. And as mental health workers and clinicians, I don't think we really have the answer. We can't force people to take medications. We can't force people to stay in the hospital because we just can't. People have their rights. And because of that, incidences like this happens. Now, I don't know if the family tried to get him help because I haven't seen any videos like that. But if I find anything supporting that, I'll, bring it when I do the final video for this trial, because I'll make this like part one. Um, but yeah, so that's where we are with this Oneal case. Hopefully, they're going to wrap it up. It's interesting because the son has been adopted by the lead detective. So that tells me a lot about the family system. You know, her family, nobody could take him in and continue to raise him and love on him. He lost his whole family. Where is the family that nobody took him in? That he needed to be adopted by the detective on the case. That speaks volumes to me. So that's it. That's all that I want to talk about for now on this case, and I will bring you the conclusion of the case once everything is settled. All right, thank you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.